Greetings, viewers. JLB, back in a while. For the first time, going back to Animated Television History Tour. Now, I realized I made a bit of a teeny miscalculation when it came to my video for Fireball XL. I realized that this wasn't the first Gerry Anderson show to actually be released overseas. I do tend to make a few mistakes when it comes to television history, and movie history, and basic animation history in general, but I intend to rectify that right here and now. You see, Fireball XL5 was not the first syndicated Gerry Andrews show to be aired here in the US on television. The first was actually a show that came about a full year or so I think a full year before Fireball XL5 was even created. It's the marvel of the age, the one and only Supercar. Now, like Fireball XL5 after it, and Four Feather Falls before it, Supercar used supermarionation, which is a bit like, well, think of the Howdy Doody show if you're new to supermarionation. If you're familiar with using marionettes in television, definitely think of the Howdy Doody show, but also think of the Woody's Roundup segment from the movie Toy Story 2. Yeah, you can probably see where this is going. You see, the show was credited to Gerry Anderson and Reg Hill, who were also responsible for the creation of Four Feather Falls. And the plot of the show centers around Supercar, a special craft that can take off and land vertically, which was invented by one Professor Rudolf Pupkis and Dr. Horatio Beaker, and piloted by a man named Mike Mercury. On land, it can ride on air rather than on wheels, sort of like a hover car. It's got jets in the rear that allow it to fly through the skies, and it has retractable wings. There are retro rockets on the side of the car that can slow the vehicle down if need be. And it used clear VU, which was basically an inside television monitor. The vehicle was housed in a laboratory and living facility at Black Rock, Nevada, here in the US, which is odd considering the show is from the United Kingdom, but I digress. Anyway, the series inaugurated what would become an Anderson trademark, that being the launch sequence. Now, with the exception of the Secret Service, all of Mr. Anderson's work up until Space 1999 included the launch sequence, like, say, in Supercar's case, the charging and firing of port and starboard engines. In layman's terms, that means left and right, respectively. The activation of an interlock, the opening of an overhead hangar doors, and finally, vertical takeoff of a vehicle. It would become a trademark in later Anderson's work. Now, this show, it was released overseas here in the US, but let's discuss the history. You see, after Granada Television failed to renew Four Feather Falls for another season, or at least for another run on television in England, the creator Gerry Anderson decided to talk with Lou Grade of ATV, the channel that aired, at least I think it did, Four Feather Falls. He asked Mr. Anderson to reduce the budget of the show by half. After working through the night, Mr. Anderson returned the next morning with the budget reduced only by at least a third, and Grade commissioned Supercar immediately. Ultimately, the Supercar itself only had about 2 working models, both designed by art director Reg Hill. The larger model was made of lightweight wood and plexiglass, or perspex, and measured about 5 feet in length. It was built by Lorry Barr of Aeronautical and General Model Makers Limited, now known as Master Molds. There was a smaller model used also. There was a smaller model that was used for distance shots, and was about 9 inches in length, and was sculpted by Slough craftsman Bill James. Now, of course, many fans of the show, such as Austin Tate, have speculated that Hill was inspired to create this car by looking at the 1954 Ford FX Atmos concept car. And when I say concept car, that means it wasn't necessarily meant for mass market or for consumer interest. It was a concept, sort of a blueprint. Anyway, how did this show fare here in the US? Well, Supercar debuted here in the US on WPIX, better known as Channel 11 in New York, which was a local station. And to all of my fans out in New York, how you doing? Now, the show debuted on Channel 11 in New York on Saturday, January the 6th, 1962 at 6:30 p.m. The station's EVP and General Manager, Fred M. Thrower, reported to ICT that after 4 weeks, the show had, quote, solidly established itself as the #1 program in its time period and the #1 weekend children's show in New York among all local children's shows in this market, with an average ARB rating of 15.2, which I can only assume is about 15.2 million viewers. I'm not really that math guy, but anyway, a year later, Supercar had been sold to 140 US and 49 foreign markets for $1.9 million in total sales, guaranteeing production of a second series of shows. But as for those series that came around, well, I think you might know if you saw my Fireball XL5 video. But of course, it would later lead on to other shows, such as Stingray, the Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Joe 90, the Secret Service. But let's just say this just proves that you can double check your history, because sometimes you might just find something unexpected. Anyway, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the official 18th episode of Animation Television History Tour. This is actually 16.5, wink wink. And until then, thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you all next time.